My son stood up at his own Christmas table in front of 28 people and told his mother to get out of his house. Not his wife. Him. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I set down my napkin, folded it once, the way I'd folded napkins my whole life, and I said one sentence out loud. The room went so quiet I could hear the furnace kick on in the basement. And then, one by one, every single person at that table stood up and followed me to the door. My daughter-in-law's face went the color of the tablecloth. She finally understood what her husband had just done. I'm sitting in my car outside my son's house right now, engine running, hands still on the wheel. And I know, the way you know a bone is broken before the swelling even starts, that nothing between us will ever be the same again. 28 guests. Bradley's 39th Christmas as my son, though he'd stopped counting them with me years before he stopped counting them at all. Snow coming down sideways outside the big bay window he was so proud of. And me in my good green dress, the one with the tiny covered buttons I'd bought 2 years earlier for an occasion that never came, because Courtney always found a reason it wasn't quite the right night. I'd brought the tart. The cranberry walnut tart, the one I'd been making since Bradley was 5 years old and too small to reach the counter, standing on a kitchen chair beside me, dropping walnut shells into the batter and laughing when I pretended not to notice. 34 years of that tart. I'd spent the whole morning on it, toasting the walnuts twice because the first batch scorched a little on the edges and I wanted it perfect. I wanted it perfect because it was the one thing I still knew how to give him that Courtney couldn't rebrand, reroute, or repackage into something with better lighting for a photograph. Courtney met me at the door with her hand already out for my coat, and when she saw the tart, something moved behind her eyes, quick, like a shadow passing over water. "Oh," she said, "we're doing a very specific dessert table this year, Alina. Very curated. I think this would look a little rustic next to everything else. Why don't we just tuck it in the kitchen with the extra folding chairs?" I want you to understand something. That was not the first time. It was only the first time I let myself really see it. I carried that tart to the kitchen myself, past the caterers Bradley had hired, the same kind of caterers I used to hire when I was 30 years younger and building something from nothing, and I set it down on the counter next to a stack of unused linens, and I smiled the smile I have used my entire life to swallow things that hurt going down. Then I walked back into the dining room, and I sat where I was told to sit. The room was loud in the particular way a room is loud when half the guests don't actually know each other and are performing warmth instead of feeling it. Bradley's business partner, a tall, nervous man named Preston who always looked like he was waiting to be told he'd done something wrong. 2 of the venue owners Bradley worked with. A florist named Renata, who I had personally introduced to my son 11 years earlier at a spring open house I hosted, back when Vance Events Co. didn't exist and Bradley Whitfield was still just my son, still just learning which end of a seating chart went up. My oldest friend, Doris Ackafer, sat 2 chairs down from me, and her husband Walter, who owned the finest event venue in 3 counties, sat beside her telling a story about a wedding that had gone sideways in a hailstorm, and everyone was laughing, and it looked, from the outside, exactly like what a family Christmas is supposed to look like. But I felt it before I understood it. The way you feel the temperature drop before you see the sky change. Something had been sharpening in that house for 2 years, and I had been telling myself it was just modern manners, just a new generation's way of doing things, just Courtney being tired, being stressed, being young and building a brand and a household at the same time. I had made 1,000 excuses. I was about to run out of them. It happened during the toasts. Preston stood up first, a little red in the face from the wine, and he raised his glass and said something kind, something about how far Vance Events had come, how it wouldn't exist without the relationships Bradley had built. And then, because he was not a careful man, because he did not know the currents running under that table, he said, and of course, half those relationships came straight from Alina. I don't think there's a florist or a venue manager in this whole region who doesn't already know and trust her name. You built on some pretty solid ground, Bradley. He meant it as a compliment. I watched it land as something else entirely. Courtney's smile didn't move, but everything underneath it did. I saw her hand find Bradley's forearm under the table, saw her fingers press in, saw the small private signal pass between them the way it must have passed between them 100 times before in rooms I wasn't in. I should have stayed quiet. I have thought about this every day since. Instead, because I am proud, because 35 years of building something out of nothing does not simply switch off because you are told to sit in the kitchen with the folding chairs. I said, lightly, trying to make a joke of it the way I always did. Well, somebody had to make the introductions before all this got so fancy. It was nothing. It was a grandmother's joke at her own expense. And Bradley stood up so fast his chair scraped back and nearly tipped. "That's enough, Mom," he said. His voice was too loud for the room, too loud for the sentence, the voice of a man who has been waiting for permission to say something for a very long time and has finally found an excuse that feels justified. You do this every time. You cannot let one night go by without reminding everyone that none of us would exist without you. I am so tired of it. I built this. I built this business, I built this house, I built this family, and I am done sitting here while you make my wife and my career sound like a favor you did us. The room had gone silent by the second sentence. 28 people frozen with forks halfway to their mouths, the way people freeze when they realize they are about to witness something they will still be talking about a year from now. "I want you to leave," Bradley said. "Get out of my house." Not, "I think you should head home early." Not, "Maybe we should talk about this another time." "Get out of my house," to his mother. In front of the florist I had introduced him to, in front of the venue owner whose first job I had ever sent his way, in front of my grandson, who was 8 years old and sitting 2 seats down with a fork of mashed potatoes stopped halfway to his mouth, looking back and forth between his father and his grandmother like he was trying to work out which one of them had just broken. Courtney did not say a word. She did not need to. Her hand was still on his arm. That was enough. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry, though something in my chest was doing something that felt very much like breaking. Quietly, the way old houses settle at night, a sound you only notice in the silence. I set down my napkin. I folded it once. I stood up slowly, the way you stand when your knees have 68 years in them and you have learned not to rush anything anymore, and I looked at my son for a long moment, long enough that he had to decide whether to hold my gaze or look away. He looked away. Then I looked at every single face at that table, one at a time, the way you take attendance, the way you make sure people understand exactly what they are choosing to witness in silence. Doris, Walter, Renata, Preston, who looked like he might be sick. My grandson Tyler, whose eyes were filling up in the particular helpless way children's eyes fill when the adults around them are doing something children instinctively know is wrong, even if they cannot name it. "I have spent my whole life building tables people wanted to sit at," I said. "This is the last one I will ever be asked to leave." That was all. No threat, no explanation, no dramatic flourish. Just a fact, laid down on the table like a place setting. I got my coat myself. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be, buttoning it, and I walked to the front door, and I did not look back, and I was 3 steps down the front walk into the falling snow when I heard the first chair scrape. Then another. Then voices, low, urgent, the particular sound of people making a decision all at once without discussing it first. By the time I reached my car, Walter Hinz was already holding the front door open for Doris, and Renata was pulling her coat off the rack in the hall, and Preston, of all people, nervous, apologetic Preston, was the third one out, saying nothing to Bradley or Courtney at all, just walking past them like they were furniture. I sat in my car with the engine idling and I watched, through the windshield, through the snow, as person after person came out of that warm-lit house into the cold, got into their cars without a word to each other, and drove away. By the time I finally put my car in reverse, 19 people had left my son's Christmas dinner. I drove home through empty streets with the radio off. My house was cold when I walked in, the way houses get when nobody has been in them all day, and I did not turn on the big lights. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark with my coat still on, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I let myself actually count. Not the years, the moments. The Tuesday 2 Aprils ago when Courtney told me, gently, so gently, that maybe I shouldn't come to Tyler's school things anymore, that it confused the other parents when grandparents showed up to parent-teacher things, that it would be better for everyone if I waited to be invited. The invitation never came. The way she had slowly stopped copying me on the emails about Tyler's birthday parties. The Christmas photograph on their mantle from 2 years back that I noticed, only once, only in passing, had been quietly retaken without me in it. A version I was never shown, a version that existed before I even knew there had been two. I had told myself every single time that I was being oversensitive. That families have seasons. That Courtney was tired, that Bradley was busy, that I should give them room to build their own life instead of hovering at the edges of it like I still had some claim on it. I had made myself smaller and smaller in my own son's life for 2 years, and I had called it grace, and it had never once been grace. It had been fear, fear of losing what little access I had left. I did not sleep that night. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, sitting in the dark with a cup of tea gone cold in front of me, I stopped grieving and started thinking, and those are two very different things, and only one of them is useful. Here is what my son never fully understood about the world I had spent 35 years building. He thought Vance Events Co. ran on his talent, his charm, his eye for design, and he was not entirely wrong. He had earned plenty of what he had. But in a region this size, in an industry this small, business does not run primarily on talent. It runs on trust that gets loaned from person to person like a chain of hands passing something fragile down a line, and every single link in that chain, the venues, the caterers, the florists, the photographers who mattered, every one of them had first opened their door to Bradley because I had called ahead. Because for 30 years before he ever hung his own shingle, my word in that industry meant something, and I had spent it, freely and gladly, vouching for my son. I had not called anyone to spend it back. Not yet. But sitting in my kitchen at 3 in the morning, I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that I was about to. Before I tell you what I did next, I want to ask you something, because I have wondered about it every day since. If your own child stood up in a room full of people and told you to leave, and did it not out of confusion but out of fear of disappointing someone else, would you forgive it because he is your blood? Or would you finally, for the first time in your life, put yourself first? Tell me honestly in the comments, because I still don't know if what I did was justice or just an old woman finally running out of patience. Monday morning, I did not call Bradley. I did not send an angry letter. I did not do anything that Courtney could later describe to her friends as an old woman's hysterics. I put on my good wool coat, and I drove to Willowmere Estate, the venue Walter Hines had built from a falling-down dairy barn into the most requested wedding site in 3 counties, and I asked the girl at the front desk if Walter had a few minutes. He came out of his office before she'd even finished relaying the message. He looked at me the way a man looks at someone he has been thinking about and dreading having to speak to, both at once. "Eleanor," he said, "come on back." We sat. He didn't offer small talk, and I appreciated that about Walter, that he had never once in 30 years wasted my time or his own. "I'm here about the referral list," I said. "I understand Vance Events is on your preferred vendor list for next season." Walter's face changed slowly, the way weather changes not all at once. "He is," he said, "has been for 6 years." "I'm asking you to take him off it," I said. "I am not asking you to badmouth him. I am not asking you to tell a single bride that Bradley Whitfield can't do the work, because he can, he's good at it, I taught him most of what he knows. I am asking you to simply stop personally recommending him. Let couples find him on their own if they want him. Don't make the introduction for him anymore." Walter sat back in his chair and looked at me for a long moment. "This is about Saturday," he said. It wasn't a question. "This is about my son standing up in front of 28 people and telling his mother to get out of his own home," I said, "and it is about 2 years before that where he let it happen quietly, and I let him, because I kept believing it would get better on its own." Walter rubbed his jaw with one hand. "You built half my referral network yourself, Eleanor," he said. "You know that. 20 years ago, you're the one who told half the caterers in this county I was worth trusting with their good clients." "I know," I said. "That's exactly why I'm the one who gets to take it back." He was quiet for a while. Outside his window, I could see the long gravel drive up to the barn, strung with the lights they left up nearly year-round now for the photographs. "All right," he said finally. "I'll let it lapse quietly at the new year. No drama, no explanation if anyone asks. I'll just say we're going in a different direction with our vendor list. That fair?" "That's more than fair," I said, and I meant it. "Eleanor," he said, as I stood to go. "For what it's worth. Half the people who walked out of that house Saturday night have already made their own calls. Doris already told Renata she wouldn't be sending her any more of her wedding referrals either. You're not the only one doing this. I want you to sit with that for a moment, the way I had to sit with it in his office. It was not only me. It had never only been about me. It was about every single person in that room who had watched a grown man humiliate his own mother in front of witnesses and understood, all at once, exactly what kind of man that made him, in business as much as in life. I made 4 more visits that week. Renata, who cried a little and hugged me and told me she'd been uncomfortable working with Vance Events for a year already, that Courtney had once made a comment about her accent in front of a client that she'd never quite forgiven. Diane Castellano, the caterer, who simply nodded and said, "Consider it done," before I'd even finished my sentence. 2 others. I did not ask anyone to fire my son. I did not ask anyone to speak a single unkind word about him. I asked only that they stop lending him their trust on my account, because that account had never been his to draw from in the first place, and he had spent it as though it would never run dry. Nothing changed right away, and that is the part people never expect. His existing contracts stayed exactly as they were. His office stayed open. His name stayed on the door. But the pipeline, the future, the calls that come in 8 months before a wedding, the referrals that arrive quietly through a caterer's recommendation or a venue manager's offhand mention, that pipeline simply, slowly, began to run dry. The way a river runs dry from upstream, invisibly, long before anyone downstream notices the water is gone. I did not call to check on him. I did not need to. Doris called me most Wednesdays, the way she always had, and some weeks she'd mention, carefully, gently, that she'd heard from someone that Bradley's spring calendar looked thinner than it used to. I let those Wednesdays pass without comment. I was not proud of the quiet satisfaction it gave me, and I was not ashamed of it either. I had spent 2 years being told I was too much, too old-fashioned, too present, and I found I did not miss the version of myself that apologized for taking up space. Tyler called me twice that January, using Bradley's old cell phone, which meant Bradley must have handed it to him without knowing, or perhaps knowing and letting him do it anyway. "Grandma," he said the first time, "are you coming to Christmas next year?" I told him I didn't know yet, sweetheart, and he was quiet for a second, and then he said, "I still have the tart, you know. Dad put it in the fridge that night. I found it the next morning, and I ate a piece for breakfast and didn't tell Mom." I laughed, actually laughed, alone in my kitchen, for the first time in weeks. Bradley showed up at my house in March, unannounced, the way I had once shown up at his before I learned better. I was in the garage, going through boxes of Harold's old tools I still hadn't been able to part with, and I heard his truck before I saw him. "We need to talk," he said, standing in the driveway with his arms crossed the way he used to stand as a teenager when he knew he was in trouble, and was trying to get ahead of it with attitude instead of an apology. "All right," I said, and kept sorting wrenches. "Willowmere dropped us from their preferred list," he said. "Renata stopped sending referrals. Diane Castellano wouldn't even return my calls for the spring gala circuit. I know what you're doing, Mom. You're going around behind my back destroying everything I built." I set down the wrench I was holding. "I'm not destroying anything, Bradley," I said. "I am simply no longer vouching for you. Those are very different things." "It's the same thing, and you know it," he said, his voice rising. "Without those referrals, I'm going to lose half my spring bookings." I looked at my son for a long moment. "Do you remember," I said, "how you got your very first venue contract? You were 26. You'd never planned an event bigger than your college roommate's engagement party. You walked into Walter Hind's office with a portfolio that had 4 events in it, and he gave you a chance on a 200-guest wedding that made your entire career, and you have always believed that was because he saw something in you." "It was because I earned it," Bradley said. "It was because I called him the night before and told him you were worth the risk," I said. "Every major account in your first 5 years came through a door I opened. You walked through those doors and you did good work once you were inside them. I have never once said otherwise. But you did not open a single one of them yourself, and you have spent 10 years telling yourself, and apparently your wife, a story where you did." His face went pale, then red. "So what, you're just going to take it all back because I said one thing at Christmas?" "You said get out of my house," I said, my voice steady, "to your mother, in front of 28 people. Because your wife squeezed your arm and you were more afraid of disappointing her for one evening than you were of humiliating me for the rest of my life. That is not one thing, Bradley. That is 2 years of things wearing one very loud face. Courtney says if this business goes under because of you, she's leaving, he said, and his voice cracked on the last word in a way that told me, more than anything else he'd said, exactly how frightened he was. Then let her leave, I said quietly. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. You don't mean that. I have never meant anything more in my life, I said. If you are so afraid of losing that woman that you would sacrifice your own mother to keep her comfortable, then you have already lost your marriage, Bradley. You just haven't noticed the funeral yet. He left without another word. I heard the truck pull out of the driveway too fast, gravel spitting, and I stood there in the cold garage a long time after the sound of it had faded, feeling the particular grief of a mother who has just told her only child the truth and watched it do nothing but wound him. The rest of that year went the way rivers go when the water stops coming from upstream. Slowly, then all at once. Vance Events Co. closed its office in September, quietly, the way businesses do when there is no dramatic collapse, just fewer and fewer reasons to keep the lights on. Courtney left in October, 2 months before the doors actually shut, and I heard through Doris, who heard it through Renata, that she'd already been seeing someone else for a while. A hotel developer from 2 counties over whose business was, notably, still standing. I did not celebrate any of it. I want to be very clear about that, because it would be easy to tell this story as a triumph, and it never once felt like one. Every piece of news that came to me that year came with a matching piece of grief. Because underneath every collapsed contract and every dried-up referral was my only child. Alone, in an apartment I had never seen, raising a little boy on weekends between shifts at a job that had nothing to do with the career I had spent 35 years building a door for him to walk through. Tyler's 9th birthday came in November. Bradley did not invite me. I sent a card anyway, with $100 folded inside, and I wrote, "Happy birthday, my darling boy, love always, Grandma," in the handwriting that has not changed since I was a young mother writing the same words to a much smaller Bradley. Doris's cousin, who lived 2 streets over from Bradley's new apartment, dropped it off at the door for me and told me, the next week over coffee, that Bradley had opened it in front of her, gone very still for a moment, and then said thank you and nothing else. I ran into him in December, almost exactly a year to the week after that Christmas dinner, outside the hardware store on Fillmore Street, the same store Harold used to take Bradley to on Saturday mornings when he was small enough to ride in the cart. We saw each other across the parking lot. We both had time to pretend we hadn't. Neither of us did. "Mom," he said. "Bradley." He looked thinner than I remembered, and older, the particular kind of older that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time without ever setting it down. "How's Tyler?" I asked. "He's good," he said. "He asks about you sometimes, about whether we're going to see you again." "What do you tell him?" I asked. "I tell him you're busy," Bradley said, and had the decency to look ashamed of the lie as he said it. We stood there a while, the cold coming up off the pavement, neither of us quite able to look at the other for more than a few seconds at a time. "I'm sorry," he said finally, and his voice broke on it the way it had broken in my garage, except this time there was no anger riding underneath it, just something tired and true. "I knew what she was doing to you those 2 years. I told myself you could handle it, that if I said something it would just cause a fight I didn't have the energy for. And then I stood up at my own table and did the exact same thing myself, out loud, in front of everyone, and I have thought about your face every single day since." "I know you are," I said. It was the most honest thing I could offer him. "Is there a way back from this?" he asked. "I'm not asking for it to go back to how it was. I don't think it can. I'm just asking if there's a door." I looked at my son for a long time, the boy who used to stand on a kitchen chair to help me toast walnuts, the man who had let 2 years of small cruelties happen in silence, and then delivered the final one himself, out loud, because he was more afraid of disappointing his wife for one evening than he was of losing his mother for the rest of his life. "I don't know yet," I said, and it was the truest answer I had. "But if there is one, it doesn't start with me forgiving you tonight in a parking lot. It starts with you showing up, again and again, on the ordinary days nobody's watching, until I believe it." He nodded, His eyes were wet and he did not try to hide it, which was new and which I noticed. "All right," he said quietly. "I can do that." "Take care of yourself, Bradley," I said, and I walked into the hardware store and did not look back, and stood just inside the door for a moment with my heart doing something complicated that I did not yet have a name for. I told Doris about it that Wednesday over coffee, the whole conversation, word for word. She listened the way she always listens, without rushing to tell me what to feel about it. "Do you think he means it?" she asked finally. "I don't know," I said, "but I know I mean what I told him. It doesn't start with me forgiving him, it starts with him showing up. He has since then. Not perfectly, not the way it used to be before any of this happened, before Courtney, before the years of small cruelties I let myself believe were nothing. He calls on Sundays now. He brought Tyler by twice in the spring. And the second time, without being asked, my grandson walked straight to the freezer where I still keep a tart on hand. Because some habits a woman doesn't give up just because her heart got broken, and he ate a slice standing at the counter exactly the way his father used to. It is a smaller life now than the one I had a year ago. Fewer galas, fewer calls from clients wanting a recommendation, fewer reasons for the phone to ring at all. But everyone left in it showed up for me when it mattered, stood up from a table, and walked out into the cold without being asked, and I have decided that is worth more than every referral I ever gave away for free. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, because I tell true stories about family, about the cost of staying silent too long, and about what happens when someone finally decides their own dignity is worth more than keeping the peace. And if you want to hear about another woman who refused to be told to get out of a room she built with her own 2 hands, there's a video waiting for you right now. You won't regret it.